The reminder came through at 8:14 on a Tuesday morning, the same way it had come through every month for 11 years. A rectangular notification on my phone screen, pale blue background, the name of the clinic printed in the same clean sans serif font that had become as familiar to me as my own handwriting. Appointment. Dr. Ferreira, Wednesday, 10:30 a.m. Your attendance is requested as interpreter for patient Celestina Okafor. I was sitting at my desk at work. I had a full calendar and a presentation due by noon and a cup of coffee going cold next to my keyboard. I looked at the notification for a long time. Then I set my phone face down on the desk, on top of the leather-bound appointment book I used to keep track of projects, and I went back to my screen. I did not confirm. I did not decline. I simply left it there, unacknowledged, and let the morning move forward without me answering. That is how 11 years ended. Not with a confrontation. Not with a speech. With a notification left on read. My name is Ren Okafor, and I am 33 years old, and I want to tell you about the particular kind of invisible that comes from being the one in your family who speaks both languages. Not invisible the way furniture is invisible. Invisible the way a floor is invisible, the thing everyone walks on without noticing because if it weren't there, they'd fall. My mother came to this country from Nigeria when I was 4 years old. My father followed 2 years later, then stayed long enough to become someone I remember mostly in photographs. My mother stayed, and she worked, and she did what immigrant parents do when the country they have chosen requires more from them than they expected. She adapted in every way she could, and held on to her first language the way you hold on to something that proves you existed before this place. By the time I was 8, I was translating simple things. By 11, I was sitting in on school meetings. By 16, I was the one speaking on her behalf at the housing office when the lease needed renewing and the landlord had questions she couldn't parse fast enough. By 22, when I graduated from university and took my first job as a health policy analyst for a mid-sized consultancy in the city, the pattern was so deep and so old that neither of us thought of it as a pattern at all. It was simply what happened. It was simply what I did. 11 years of appointments. 11 years of waiting rooms. 11 years of sitting in those particular plastic chairs with my coat folded on my lap and my phone on silent, translating medical terminology into Yoruba and translating my mother's descriptions of her symptoms back into English that the doctors could chart. 11 years of taking half-days from work, of rescheduling my own life around a calendar that was not mine, of being the bridge between my mother's body and the healthcare system that was supposed to serve it. I want to be precise about the scope of what I mean when I say this. In 11 years, I attended 47 appointments. I know this because I counted them once at 2 in the morning during a stretch of insomnia when I had started paying closer attention to the shape of my own life. 47. General practitioner visits, specialist consultations, a cardiologist twice after scare in 2021, a physiotherapy intake, 3 pharmacy consultations for medication changes, and the long, slow series of appointments following my mother's hip surgery the year before last, which required me to take 6 full days of annual leave across a 3-month period. I had not complained. I want to say that clearly. I had done all of it willingly because I loved my mother, because I understood what it was to navigate a system in a language that was not yours, because I am her daughter, and being her daughter means something to me. What I did not fully understand, for most of those 11 years, was what it cost me to be the bridge. What I was beginning to understand, by the time that Tuesday morning came, was the difference between choosing to give something and being assumed into giving it without anyone asking. My mother had a sister, Auntie Beezy, who lived 40 minutes north of the city and called every Sunday. Auntie Beezy was warm and loud and had opinions about everything, including me, and her most consistent opinion was that I had not yet married, which was a problem, and that I spent too much time on my career, which was suspicious, and that I should be grateful to have a mother who needed me because needing meant love. I had heard this view expressed in various forms my whole adult life. I had let it settle into the background noise of being myself in this family. Here is what I understood about my mother that took me a long time to say clearly. She had not invented this. The pattern of daughters being available, of daughters being the ones who held things together, of daughters' time being communal property while sons' time was their own, that pattern had been handed to her intact from her own mother and to her mother from hers, across generations that never had occasion to question it because no one had told them it was a question. My mother was not cruel. She was not calculating. She was a woman who had absorbed a set of rules about what daughters were for, and those rules had never been named out loud because they didn't need to be. They simply were. They were the floor everyone stood on. I understood this. It did not make the floor any more comfortable to be. The thing that changed was not dramatic. I want to say that too because the story I'm telling you might sound like it was building towards something explosive, and it wasn't. It was building towards something very quiet. It was a Saturday afternoon in late January. I was at my mother's house, a small semi-detached in the east of the city, the house I had grown up in, the house that smelled like the particular combination of palm oil and the lavender soap my mother bought in bulk from a shop on the high street. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and my mother was on the phone with Auntie Beezy, and I was only half listening. And then I heard it, clear as anything. My mother's voice, easy and warm the way it always was with her sister, sang in Yoruba. She has no husband. What else is she doing? At least this way she is useful.
She was talking about me.
She was not whispering. She was not trying to hide it. She said it the way you say something you have said 100 times before, the way you say something you have never once considered might be overheard. Because it is simply a truth you have always held, and truths don't require lowering your voice. I sat with my cup of tea, and I did not move. I did not go cold. I did not feel my heart race. I felt something stranger than either of those things. I felt something that had been quietly shifting underneath me for years finally finished moving. Like a tectonic thing. Like the ground finishing a slow adjustment it had been making for a long time. I stayed another 40 minutes. I washed my cup. I said goodbye the way I always did. I drove home in my Honda Civic along the bypass, the same route I had driven 100 times, and I did not cry until I was parked outside my building, and even then I didn't cry for long. I cried because I had heard her say it. I cried because it was true that I had no husband. I cried because what else is she doing was the sentence that named what I had been to her all this time, and once a thing has been named out loud, you cannot pretend it doesn't have a shape. Then I went inside. I made another cup of tea. I sat at my own kitchen table, smaller than my mother's, cleaner, with a framed certificate for my professional development program on the wall above it, and I thought about what I actually wanted. At work the next Monday, I had lunch with Priya Ingleton. Priya was a senior analyst 2 years above me at the consultancy, and she had been my closest friend there since our first week, when she had noticed that I was always the one who stayed late to prepare the slide deck nobody else would touch, and had said, with the directness I had come to love about her, "You know that when you volunteer for everything, the reward is more volunteering." I told her what I had heard. Not the whole 11 years. Priya knew the broad shape of it already, but the specific sentence. She has no husband. What else is she doing? Priya set down her sandwich. How long has this been going on? She said. 11 years of appointments, I said. 47 if you count them. And she thinks your time is free because you're single. She thinks my time belongs to her, I said. She always has. I just didn't have a word for it until Saturday. Priya was quiet for a moment. She picked up her sandwich again, then put it down again. She said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to stop," I said. "I want to just stop showing up. See what happens." Have you told her that?
No.
Are you going to? I thought about it. I thought about the conversation I would have to have, the explanations I would need to give, the way my mother would hear any explanation I offered as an accusation, the way Auntie Beezy would be called, the way the aunts would form a kind of soft collective pressure, unanimous and warm and immovable. I thought about all of that, and I thought, or I could simply not confirm the next appointment. I could simply let Wednesday come without me in it. No, I said. I don't think I am. Priya looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." Just that. One word. The word that meant, I see you. I'm with you. I don't need to argue you out of it. I went back to my desk and I picked up the leather-bound appointment book and I looked at the half-day I had penciled in for Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. I erased it. I picked up a pen and wrote in its place, Project Callaway, prep, full morning. That was the Monday. Tuesday morning, the reminder came. I left it on read. Wednesday arrived the way ordinary days arrive, quietly, without ceremony. I was at my desk by 8:45. I had 2 project calls before noon, and the Callaway prep I had genuinely scheduled, and I worked through the morning without thinking about the clinic on Marsden Street, without thinking about the waiting room chairs or the receptionist who knew my face, without thinking about my mother sitting in examination room 3 at 10:30 a.m. with a doctor she could partially understand, and forms she would struggle to fill out on her own. I did not think about any of it. I kept my phone face down on the desk. At 11:53, Priya walked past my desk and set a takeaway coffee cup next to my keyboard. She didn't say anything. She just left it there, and I understood it for what it was, a small, warm flag that said I know what today is and I'm not going to make it bigger than it needs to be. By 12:06 I was in the kitchen making lunch when my phone screen lit up on the counter. I could see the number from across the room. My mother's mobile. I watched it ring. I watched it stop. I watched it start again. I ate my lunch. The phone rang 4 more times before I sat back down. That afternoon, I did something I had not done in years. I sat at my desk, and instead of working, I opened a blank document, and I started writing down the things I had given up. Not as a list, not as an accusation, just as a record, the way you might keep a household ledger, so you know what went where. I wrote down the 6 days of annual leave for the hip surgery recovery. I wrote down the 3 half-days in November that pushed a project deadline and required me to work a Saturday to compensate. I wrote down the lunch breaks I had eaten in my car outside the rheumatology clinic on Whitmore Road. I wrote down the afternoon 2 years ago when I had missed my own department's end-of-year event, the one where my colleague Marcus had been recognized with the Internal Excellence Award I had been told I was also being considered for, because my mother had a medication review she couldn't attend without me. I wrote it all down. It took 40 minutes. When I was done, I sat back and looked at what I had written, and I felt the specific grief of finally adding things up. It was 2:17 p.m. My phone screen lit up again. I glanced at it. 28 missed calls. I set it face down. I went back to the document. I did not call back. At 3:30 in the afternoon, I went to the bathroom, closed a stall door, and sat on the closed lid with my coat on my lap because the bathroom was cold. I stared at the tiles on the opposite wall, small white squares, a few of them slightly off-center, the grout darkening at the edges from years of use, and I held my phone in both hands, and I almost called her back. It was 3:31 p.m. My phone said, 28 missed calls for voicemails, 2 text messages. The texts were from Auntie Beezy. I did not open them. The voicemails I played on low volume, one by one, with the phone held close to my ear. The first one was my mother's voice, confused and slightly breathless, saying she didn't understand a word the doctor had written on the form. The second was sharper. The third was Auntie Beezy, before I even knew she had been called. The fourth was my mother again, quieter this time, saying my name in the way she said it when she was genuinely uncertain, not performing, just uncertain. "Ren, where are you?" And something in my chest contracted sharply at the sound of it. I sat there for a while longer. The bathroom hummed with its overhead ventilation. Someone came in, washed their hands, left. I looked at the return call button, and I sat with the fact that I could press it, and everything would go back to how it was right now this afternoon, and it would feel like relief for approximately 4 hours, and then it would not feel like relief at all. It would feel like the floor reasserting itself beneath my feet, like the ground deciding it was not going to shift after all. I put my phone in my pocket. I opened the stall door. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink, just for a moment, just a second of ordinary recognition, and then I walked back to my desk. I did not call back that afternoon. Some things you can put back on the shelf after you have taken them down to look at them. And some things, once you have really seen them, cannot be made small again. The calls came every few hours for the next 3 days. My mother called. Auntie Beezy called. A cousin I had not spoken to in 2 years called, which meant Auntie Beezy had started making the rounds. On Friday evening, I came home from work to find Auntie Beezy standing in the corridor outside my apartment door with a Tupperware container of jollof rice and an expression I recognized as the family's official face of gentle disapproval.
"Come inside," I said.
"I'll put the kettle on." She sat at my kitchen table the same way my mother sat at her kitchen table, with a particular kind of settled authority, and she said, "Your mother didn't understand half of what was in that letter they gave her." "I know," I said. She called me crying. I know that too, I said. Auntie Beezy looked at me the way she had looked at me since I was a child, with love and with the full expectation that her love entitled her to direct me. She said, "Why didn't you go?" I brought the tea to the table. I sat down. I thought about the 47 appointments. I thought about the 6 days of annual leave. I thought about the sentence my mother had said on the phone. I thought about all of that, and I said, very carefully, because I needed her to experience once what it is like to go alone. Auntie Beezy was quiet. "That's all," I said. "Not forever. Not as a punishment. Once. So she knows what I've been doing for 11 years, and so she knows what happens when I don't." "She knows you go with her," Auntie Beezy said. "She's always known. She knows I show up," I said. "I don't think she knows it costs me anything to do it. I think she believes it costs me nothing because I'm her daughter, and this is simply what daughters do." Auntie Beezy picked up her tea. She held it in both hands and looked down into the cup the way people look into cups when they are thinking something they are not yet ready to say. And then she said, quietly, in a voice I hadn't heard her use before, "Her mother was the same. Did you know that? Her mother never thanked her either. It was just assumed. I hadn't known that. Or I had half known it, the way you half know things that explain a great deal if you look directly at them, but you've been looking slightly to the side of for years because looking directly is too much to do all at once." "I know," I said. "I know it came from somewhere." "It doesn't make it right," Auntie Beezy said. "No," I said. "It doesn't." We sat there for a while after that, just the two of us, with the tea and the jollof rice in its container on the table between us, not saying anything, which was its own kind of conversation. My mother and I talked 10 days later. Not on the phone, in person, at her kitchen table, where we had been having every important conversation since I was old enough to sit at it. I had asked her to have tea with me, and she had said yes, and we had done the whole ordinary ritual. The kettle, the cups, the small sounds of a kitchen doing what it does. I said, "I need to tell you something." She said, "I know." "I've been going to your appointments for 11 years, I said. 47 appointments. And I have never once asked you to acknowledge what that costs me, because I thought it was enough that I was doing it. I think I was wrong. I think the not asking made it easier for both of us to pretend it was nothing." My mother looked at the table. "When you told Auntie Beezy I had nothing else to do," I said, "I heard it. I was sitting right there." She was quiet for a long time. When she looked up, her face had something in it I didn't have a word for. Not shame exactly, not quite remorse. Something more like the expression of someone who has been told a fact they already knew but had not allowed themselves to think about directly. "I didn't mean," she started. "I know you didn't mean it badly," I said. "That's what I'm trying to explain to you. You didn't mean it badly, because you've never had to mean it. It's just the way it is. Daughters do this. It costs nothing. That's the whole story." She was quiet again. "I'm not going to stop coming to appointments with you," I said. "I want to be clear about that. You are my mother, and I am not walking away from you. But I need you to understand that when I come, I am choosing to come. It is a choice I am making. And I need there to be some acknowledgement, some small acknowledgement that it is a choice I make. That it costs me something. That my time is mine to give, not yours to take." My mother looked at her teacup. She looked at her hands. She said in Yoruba something I will not translate exactly, but that meant approximately, "I did not know how to think about this differently." "I know," I said. "I'm asking you to learn." We sat there for a long time after that. Eventually she got up and cut 2 pieces of the puff puff she had made that morning and put them on the table between us, and I ate mine, and we talked about other things for a while, and by the time I left her house the agreement between us was not spoken and not signed, but it was there, in the room, settled the way things settle, when 2 people who love each other have finally said a hard thing, and are both still standing. I have been thinking in the months since about what it means to be the one in your family who carries a language. Not just a literal language, though that is what the story is about, in its specific details, but anything you carry that nobody else in your family has chosen to carry. The person who does the admin. The person who smooths things over. The person who shows up without being asked, so consistently for so long that the showing up stops being seen as a choice and becomes invisible. The word for what I was is bridge. And bridges are walked on. That is their function. You do not stop to appreciate a bridge when you are crossing it. You simply cross. The problem is not being a bridge. I don't think there is anything wrong with the impulse to connect things, to translate, to make things easier for the people you love. The problem is when being a bridge becomes so automatic that you forget you had a choice about whether to be one. When you stop being someone who chose this and become simply someone this is done to. I saw a therapist for the first time that spring, a woman named Dr. Adiz Nwosu, whose office was a 20-minute walk from my flat, and in our first session, she asked me what I had wanted for myself before I became the person who went to all the appointments. I sat with that question for a long time before I answered, because the honest answer was that I could not clearly remember a time when I had been thinking about my own future without simultaneously thinking about my mother's needs running alongside it like a second current. That realization was not a comfortable one. I am not going to tell you it resolved itself quickly or cleanly, because it didn't, and I would be lying to you if I said otherwise. What I can tell you is that it began to resolve.
Slowly.
In the way most real things resolve. Not all at once, not with a scene, but with a series of ordinary mornings where I woke up and was a person whose time was hers. I still go to appointments with my mother. I went last month, in fact, a follow-up with a cardiologist, the same clinic on Marsden Street, the same waiting room chairs. I sat beside her, and I translated, and I did what I have always done, and at the end of it my mother turned to me in the car on the way home and said, in Yoruba, "Thank you," and then looked out the window as if the words had surprised her on their way out. It was not a dramatic moment. It was a very small moment. But I had driven this route 48 times, and that was the first time I had heard those words at the end of it. There is a particular cost to being invisible inside your own family. Not the dramatic kind of invisible, not the kind where someone calls you names or cuts you out or makes their disregard a spectacle. The quiet kind. The kind where your presence is so assumed that its removal is what finally makes it visible. I did not want to hurt my mother. I did not want to make a point. I wanted to be seen doing something I had been doing unremarked for over a decade, and the only way I knew how to make the invisible visible was to briefly, quietly, let it be absent. Family, without respect, becomes entitlement, and entitlement grows teeth the moment you build something it cannot reach. Love that asks you to be invisible is not love. It is management. If someone only sees what you carry when you put it down, the answer is not to carry it again without them seeing. The answer is to put it down long enough for them to look. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors. And I am the one who decides who walks through. Some kindnesses are loans the lender forgets they're making. Daughters know this better than anyone. We have been making those loans since before we were old enough to understand interest. I am 33 years old. I am a health policy analyst. I have a small flat and a Honda Civic and a framed certificate on my wall and a friendship with Priya that is one of the better things in my life. I go to my mother's appointments when I choose to go. I translate when I choose to translate. And every time I choose it, I know it is a choice, mine freely made from a place that belongs to me. If there is something in your life that you have been doing so long that you have forgotten it is a choice, something you carry so automatically that the people around you have stopped seeing the carrying, ask yourself when you last set it down long enough for someone to notice the weight of it. You might be surprised what becomes visible when you let yourself be briefly, quietly unavailable.